Ooh, interesting question. Music is actually essential to many people's lives, to an extent that we don't quite measure sometimes, but we have very, very clear data that learning an instrument, practicing an instrument throughout life is extremely good for the brain. So today is November 6th, 2024. We just missed an opportunity to elect a woman president.
Welcome to Sottosoglia, the podcast that nobody can pronounce. I am Giulia D'Angelo.
And I am Fabrizio Ottati.
And please, Fabri, introduce the guests.
Okay, welcome everyone. Today with us we are Claire Pelofi.
Hi.
She's a research scientist in music cognition at the New York University in the Music and Audio Research Laboratory. Her research focuses on the cognition of scale structures by both musicians and non-musicians. She holds a PhD from the École Normale Supérieure in auditory neuroscience, and we welcome her. Thanks for joining,
Thanks.
Claire.
Yeah, we're
Thanks.
so happy to have you, Claire. It's like the first woman. Welcome to welcome to Sottosoglia, Claire.
And the
Thank you.
first
Thank you
and the
for
first
having me.
non-engineer.
Right, yeah, that's a good point too. So it would be super nice, Claire, if you just talk a little bit about yourself. If you tell us a little bit more about yourself so that we get to know you and your background.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased and honored to be here with you. But so I was born in south of France and raised in south of France, and then I studied in parallel of all my studies. I studied violin and music theory and solfège and stuff like that at the Conservatory of Music throughout all my years of studying. And after I graduated from college, from high school. I studied first. I studied philosophy and logic, and I had a master degree in philosophy. And then during my master, I wanted to study the brain because I was doing a lot of logic and philosophy of the mind, and I wanted to have a more of a data approach, a scientific, quantitative approach to these questions that I was dealing with from a philosophical standpoint. So I enrolled in a master degree of neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, and so I had to learn from scratch a lot of actually coding and statistics. So I am not a engineer by training. I'm an engineer as a matter of fact, because that's what I do now, and a lot of signal processing and things like that. But this is all stuff that I learned during my master and after during my PhD. So I enrolled into this second master of neuroscience, and then I continued on a PhD. And during my PhD, I was working on auditory scene analysis, so how you perceive complex auditory scenes and the differences between musicians and non-musicians in the way that you can pick up on complexity of spectral cues, for instance, and things like that. So I was working with, in particular, with something very cool, which is ambiguous sounds, so sounds that you can hear
Oh
one way
wow.
or another. And I was looking at how musicians and non-musicians respond to this ambiguity. And I mean, you should read my PhD, obviously. No, I'm joking. I'm gonna break it to you. So the idea is that when you're a highly trained musician, you're able to hear the ambiguity. So you hear both pathways at the same time, as opposed to when you're a musician, where you're sort of like your brain chooses a path and you're completely oblivious of the other possibility out there. If that makes sense.
Oh wow, that's super
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't like you have done lots of things. Okay. I
Okay.
And
should
then
know.
And after I graduated my PhD, I came to New York, and I was
Mm-hmm.
indeed working as a postdoc for the Music and Audio Research Laboratory at NYU, which is attached to Steinhardt Department. I was staying there. I stayed there for a year and a half, and then I left to work briefly in Marseille. I was working with epileptic patients and SEG data, so data from electrodes from deep within the brain.
Okay.
And I stayed there for actually just a year, or not even. I had my first child that was born during this postdoc, and then I came back to New York on a grant and on a position that was much more sustainable, which is my current position. And actually, I'm part of something that's called the Center for Language, Music, and Emotion that's attached to the psychology department, and where I lead the research program there. And I focus mostly on music, but I work with people who also work on language and emotion and the sort of like intertwining and intersections between those three main components of human cognition.
Okay, so you're a principal investigator now there, right?
Yes, exactly.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. And how old were you when you had the first child? This just touches me as a woman.
I was very young for someone in the field. I was very young. I was like 30. Oh,
Okay.
she was
Okay.
30. Let me think. Yes, no, I was 30 when she was born. I turned 31 after she was born, a couple of months after. But yeah, no, and it was, I mean, even when I had my second at 33, I was surrounded by most women in my field didn't have kids yet. They have it at, 39, 40, 41,
Yeah.
which is just, I mean, that's another question, but by design, because it's careers where it's hard to combine both, and it
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be the case. People should be more free to have children whenever they want, but
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm 34 and I kind of feel somehow the clock, but I'm kind of not thinking
well,
about it for now.
I can tell you
Yeah.
one thing is also enjoy not having children, because that's
Yeah.
one day you will, maybe, if you want, and that's something. So,
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I have like a gazillion questions that I would like to ask you, but we need to get to know you better. And as I said before sort of pressing record, this is Sottosoglia, and is the person behind the scientist. So what we want to understand is your path, how you got to be the scientist that you are today, why your failures, and how you coped with that. But we have somehow the first question to break the ice of this podcast that Fabrizio and I want to ask you is how are you at the moment?
ooh, interesting question. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm in an interesting moment of my life right now, but I feel like I'm doing very well under the circumstances, and actually even better than I used to on some levels. So
Mm-hmm.
overall, well.
Okay, nice to hear it. Okay, so we can actually start with the podcast. So we have a surprise for you.
Mhm.
Here you have the Sottosoglia cards. So these are our cards where behind there are questions. Okay. So I'm gonna draw whatever random. You give me a number, you tell me at the top or the bottom, and we can actually start with the podcast. You tell
Okay,
me.
easy.
Where do I pick?
11.
11. For some reason, I still count in Italian. There's no way I'm gonna
Ah, me too.
count.
No, that's
Yeah.
gonna stay always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's nice. No, that's nice. You've been lucky. What has been the most rewarding moment in your career so far?
In my career,
Hmm.
oh, I know. Mm, yes, I would say this one. I'm hesitant between two actually.
It's okay. Yeah, go on.
Okay, I would say no. The most rewarding one is when I got my first, and for now my only NSF grant to the research program that I really pulled out of my heart and gut and sweat and brain. Not all alone, obviously, and I was working with people, and but I really it was like my scientific baby, and we got it funded for almost $1 million for 3 years, and that was a
Okay.
huge reward for me to be able to achieve such. I mean, for me at least, it was an achievement, and I was very proud of that. But another very rewarding and in some ways more meaningful because more emotionally important moment of my career is when was I participated to the Telluride neuromorphic engineering workshop for the first time in 2017, and I was picked as the best new neuromorph. And each every single year when I go back, I'm reminded of this amazing achievement. I mean, it's a prize for participants, but it means something to people there, and it means something to me because of my deep connection and engagement with the community.
Yeah.
So yeah. I want to share with you that it's also very meaningful because I've been elected like a couple of weeks ago as the next co-chair and chair of the Telluride Neuromorphic Workshop. So I'm going to be coming back as the main organizer. And when I see my path, with this community, yeah, it's meaningful for me because really it's like a family. And everybody that I meet
Definitely.
there is always, I'm always amazed as, it does such a great job at selecting people that are extremely inspiring.
Mm.
So you spend 3 weeks, well, it feels like 3 years, but 3 weeks with people that are just amazing on so many levels.
Mm.
Last year we launched the concert, and for me, who's my relationship with music being what it is, was just an opportunity to see how people can, like, human shine on so many levels and perspective. And of course, to me, it's all tied together. The creativity of our minds is linked to our sensitivity and our relationship to music. So it was really special, and I'm just so happy to be coming back as a co-chair and chair in the next years.
I'm so happy for you, really clear. I'm really happy. And
It will be months.
I can confirm everything. I was there, and I mean, I saw you playing amazingly the violin with Jens Peterson. It was freaking amazing, guys. Like,
It
Jesus.
was so
And
cool.
yeah, next year I would like to put some dance part also because I mean, as a dancer,
Oh, that's
yeah,
wonderful. I didn't know you danced.
I'm
Oh,
a
that's
teacher. Yes,
wonderful. Oh,
yes,
really?
yes. Oh,
Oh, well,
yeah.
we'll have to do something then.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so we go for the second question. You tell me again.
Another number?
Mm-hmm. Whatever you
7.
want. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, up to 10, I can still do English. After 10, it's impossible. Uh-huh. But okay, no, this we have asked this question recently. So give me another number.
Okay. 5.
Okay. Ah, okay. What is a common myth or misconception about your field of study? Might be difficult.
Um, 2 that I want to mention.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is that music is not that relevant to study. Some people think that it's not that interesting, that it's not that central, that it's just like a, you know, marginal topic of interest for neuroscience. And
Mm-hmm.
I beg to disagree. I think it's one of the most important one for several reasons. And for so two main reasons. The first reason is that music is actually essential to
Mm-hmm.
many people's lives. To an extent that we don't quite measure sometimes, but not only at the individual level, but also at the societal level. Like people listen to music, they enjoy music, they produce music, they spend a lot of money on music. It's just an activity that's just very prevalent, very present, ubiquitous across the world. And so it's really like a landmark of humankind and therefore a avenue of investigation into music or into the human mind that's just very unique, very, very special, and very fruitful. And the second main reason why I think music should not be disregarded as such a precious a window is because it's an amazing topic of study for the reasons that first it's very ecological. People, as I said, they engage in music spontaneously. They want to listen to it. It's something that they do no matter what you do. Like you don't have to drag them to the lab and force them to listen to music. They already do that at home. That's the first reason. But the second reason is because of its a structure. It's a signal that you can model in so many interesting ways. You can model it as a symbolic level if you cut it into MIDI representation. So you have notes with different heights. On the frequency axis, and you have duration, and with these information you can just model the shit out of it, and you can put it into different types of model that are either linear or nonlinear, however complex you want to have it, and you can have an idea of the structure and the complexity of the structure and the embeddings and the long-term dependencies and the short-term ones, and then you can ask so many questions about how people process these structures in a way that's both ecological, very quantitative, very well controlled, very where you can have a lot of theory and hypothesis-driven approach, but also informed by data. You can train it on so many data because there's just so many music. And there is not a lot of stimuli that are like that out there. Actually, there is none that can also be where you can also look at cross-cultural variations and cross-cultural responses. Because if you think of language, which would be the main thing that you would compare it to, people don't want to listen to language they don't know. I mean, you can do it so far as, you can study phoneme sensitivity and things like that. But with music, there is so much processing that's happening even with music that you have never heard before. And that's just such a fascinating way to look at how the brain works, invariant of its cultural background, but also as a response to it. And that's why it's fascinating, I think. So that's the first myth, that music is not as important. Is the cheesecake, as Pinker once called it very ignorantly. But the second misconception that I see within the field more, or within people who think that they know music or things like that, is that it's usually believed that musicians and non-musicians differ so much that it's not even really interesting to study non-musicians, or that but actually, what we have seen over and over again is how non-musicians are extremely proficient at processing structures, or are very similar at processing structures to musicians. And it actually goes back to the point that I was making earlier, which is people are musicians. No matter how much training and explicit training they had in conservatory of music, your brain responds to music in a way that's vastly similar to mine, despite of all the years of difference. I mean, not to you because you're a dancer, so you're already a trained musician, but anybody who wouldn't have any formal training, our brain are actually very similar in the way we respond to music, precisely because people listen to music. They're experts in this stimulus, no matter how much training they have. So it's more like the difference between the understanding of language from a formal grammarian expert and just a normal speaker. If you're a musician, you're going to have theory-driven intuitions and an explicit understanding of the rules and how it works. But if you're just a normal speaker, you're going to have a lot of understanding as well. It's just not as explicit. It's more implicit.
Okay, then I don't know if Fabrizio want to say something, but I have a question, which is like
After
much
you.
more of a personal question. So basically, what I'm thinking now is that your approach to music is, of course, as a musician, you have this passion, right? So you have a specific approach to music, and it's the same for me as a dancer, right? It's kind of shaping our life, and I see it's kind of like okay, it's kind of deep and dark, but I see myself going into depressive phases of my life if I detach myself from music. So as soon as I stop listening to music, I know that that is like a symptom that I'm starting a depressive phase. And it's insane how much I recognize that. So I wonder if you have the same. And the second thing is I want to enhance and reinforce what you said is the same for dancers. People think, oh, I have no coordination, I can't dance. That's not true. Locomotion is rhythm. Rhythm is in you. Full stop, period. No, no, Fabri, I can make you dance. I'm sure I can make you
Sure.
dance. It's just that everybody is different and everybody has a different way of moving, but rhythm is an us because we walk. So I want to know
And we breathe.
your personal approach to music and what tells you to you as a person.
Yeah, just a little anecdote though on this dancing point, if I may. I During my years at the conservatory in Lyon, there was a section for dancing, and we used to go to the parties and mixing dancers and musicians. And I agree that we all know how to dance, but classically trained dancers, you put them in a party of electronic music, you can definitely spot them. Like they will
Okay.
move in a way, and it has nothing to do, like the type of movements they make is so different from they were like classical ballet dancers, right? But the way they move their body and everything, it's always like extremely fluid and extremely well coordinated and graceful and beautiful, and you could spot them usually on the dance floor. That being said, I agree that the gap, especially there's some people that are just so gifted, at either dancing or singing or without any formal training. To go back to your first question, yes, I totally understand and relate. Myself, I have a very, like anybody who's really, any musician will tell you the same, but I have a very deep, emotional, very, yeah, very deeply rooted relationship with music. And so practicing music for me is really a part of my life. And yeah, if I find myself away from it, it means that something's not right.
Yeah.
But actually, I do, how do you say, manage my life a lot around being able to play music. Um, and practice it as regularly as I can, and playing with others. I'm not at the. I mean, yeah. I mean, on a personal note, I'm not someone who enjoys so much playing in front of an audience. I actually played a couple of days ago at a concert, and for some reason, I mean, for me, it's a bit hard to really enjoy playing for an audience. I much more enjoy playing with friends in an intimate setting where there are just either us or one or two people in the room. But for me to play in front of people is more a bit, it's always a bit more challenging. And I do it because, it's part of the thing, and the more you do it, the better you are at it, supposedly. And it's also nice, to share that and to encourage other people to do the same, no matter what's your level. But I do, yeah, I do manage my life so that I can practice very regularly. I remember at some point I made a very conscious choice after I had my second child to drop sport and to just do
Yeah.
music because I didn't have time to do
Of
everything.
course, yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'll die younger and I will not be as in shape, and that's it. But at least I will, my mental health will be at the top.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I totally understand. I mean, I don't have so much time again here to do swing lessons and Lindy Hop, and I miss it a lot, and my mental health is kind of like requiring it. So,
Actually, I
yeah.
just want to add something to that. So
Yeah.
not only it's deeply rooted in my, life, my daily life, and my emotional well-being and everything, but it's also rooted in my intellectual life, to the point that I sometimes joke that I'm a musician interested in neuroscience more than a neuroscientist interested in music. Music is the center of my intellectual world, and I approach it through the lens of neuroscience and cognitive science. But the what keeps me wondering, and what animates my mind is questions about how, like, what is music? Why is it made this way? Why are we so
Yeah.
craving it? Why was it invented? What was common ground with language? How did it evolve? Like how our brain still hold on to that, and those sort of questions.
So I think Fabri is the discomfort time. We call it discomfort time, but sometimes Fabri is nice and it doesn't make it discomfortable. But it's
Okay.
Fabrizio's time. You
Bring it
go.
This
on.
is
Bring it on.
no. This is completely out of my field, so I don't have. I just have a genuine curiosity. Before you said that there isn't a, let's say, a big difference between normal people and musicians in the way they can process music. Mm, Are mm, the first question that pops to my mind is: are we born with music? Uh, in a certain sense, can you beyond the pure talent that someone can have, or can we learn in a certain sense also to enjoy some kind of musics in that sense? I can make my personal example. For instance, I am fascinated by jazz, and I would, and one thing that I always thought is I would like to enjoy it, but for me, it's hard to enjoy it in a certain sense. While I see that other people and understand it, of course, but there are some technical difficulties.
Ah,
So
it's
is it
interesting.
actually the true that there is not so much difference between those two completely different words, normal people and musicians, that to me are extraordinary people, to me at
Um,
least.
well, they're not normal people, but a lot of normal people are normal as well. Either.
Yeah, no, just
Most of them
extraordinariness.
are a bit crazy. Um, Um, no, but yeah, I mean you're confusing a bit two things because you can be a highly trained musician and still have difficulties processing jazz, for instance. That's my case. Jazz music to me, and it's very similar to you, I think, to your experience, is something that I'm very interested in, but there is something that I just don't grasp. And I was not trained as a jazz performer. There is certain type of jazz that makes sense to me. Manouche jazz, like gypsy jazz. How is it called? Sorry, klezmer jazz, which is klezmer music mixed with jazz, or New Orleans jazz. But everything that's more like free jazz, New York, Chicago, kind of. This is just not my tune, and I've struggled to understand why really. Like, what is it? It is something about my brain that just doesn't process the information in a way that's similar to the people who enjoy it for sure. Um, where I was going somewhere with that thought. Um, yes, yeah. So it's funny that you were asking about whether it's something that needs to be learned or not.
Ah,
Because it's actually the question that I had at my exam at the end of high school. In France, we have to graduate high school with like a big, sort of like a big set of exams. And in philosophy, I had this very question, and it's funny because I mean it was meant to be because I was already a lot of thinking about that a lot, and then I kept thinking about it a lot during my future years. But so, I mean, musicians and non-musicians are still different on some accounts. For instance, the way we perceive literal differences between tones is much more. The threshold is much smaller if you have a musical training. Like your sensitivity to differences in the small increment of frequency is heightened if you have a musical training. That's one thing. So your working memory for, it seems actually, for auditory perception at large, like any sort of auditory sequence, is also heightened when you are a musician. As a matter of fact, there were some studies made on musical prodigies, and it seems that one of the things that distinguishes musical prodigies from either a regular children, or even the prodigies in other aspects, is their working memory. So there is something about retaining auditory information that has,
wow.
and it makes sense when you think about Mozart, for instance. He was famous for being amazingly talented at just reproducing anything that he had heard once. And he could just reproduce it on the keyboard and then even expand it. And it does require a very, very good, representation of the sequences that has to do with this working memory thing. So there is something that's trained when you're a musician, but what's very interesting is that just like language, I think because music is such an integral part of our need for survival, like it evolved from something
Yes.
that was very deep, that served a very deep purpose in the way the human were shaped, and the brain of human were shaped. There is still some things that we naturally can pick up on, and that are either more or less trained explicitly through training, but everybody is born with a music sensitivity.
Mhm.
Almost
Yeah,
everybody. My
and I
mother
would
is
Yeah.
not, but that she's an exception. Like we're studying her.
I remember you said it in
Okay.
Telluride. But I would like to add this thing also for dance because it's the same. Like I have done ballet, I have done modern, I have done modern jazz, whatever. And then at some point I started with hip hop and I started with house and I started with Lindy hop, which is basically everything coming with from Africa. It sounds with me. It just feels mine. I don't know how to explain it, but I just resonate with those sounds so well, and it's clear. You see it also in my face dancing that thing. It's clear. Like
Mm.
you can clearly say it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
so
Another silly thought that I had, silly because I'm very ignorant in this field, is would it change if kids were trained at a very early age?
uh,
Could they learn to be passionate and to have those special pathways in their brain? Because I'm thinking about the Jan LeCun paper, Optimal Brain Damage, for instance, but that's for a completely different thing. But it
Yeah,
shows that you are born with a gazillion of
yeah,
neurons and then you lose them. So,
yeah. That's a very interesting question. There is not a lot of studies that were done in a way that was sufficiently controlled and randomized to assess very clearly the benefits of music training. Because usually we see that kids that study music from a young age, they tend to have, better verbal IQ, better working memory, better abilities, auditory abilities, better cognitive abilities in general. Yeah, I mean, slightly better. And very much of this can be driven by correlations effects rather than causation, which is, kids who study music are born in family where intellectual tasks and cores are considered more important into the daily life and education of children, so that naturally these children are going to be exposed to more stimulating environment, which drives up those tests, right? So that's correlation. But if you want to isolate the effect of music as opposed to, I don't know, painting or any other sort of
mhm.
artistic or stimulating activity, extracurricular activity, you need to run some randomized trials. And there are a few studies that have done that. Nina Kraus from I think University in Chicago. I don't remember the name, but or maybe University of Chicago. Anyways, so this woman, Nina Kraus, she studied a lot of these things, and she found that there was some causation effects on several items of intelligence and the development of cognitive abilities for kids, especially related to language processing and auditory processing and sequence processing at large. Um, so yeah, there is a little evidence. The data is very, we don't have a lot of data, but there seems to be the case that developing music abilities from a young age is very beneficial for the brain, as opposed to other types of activities that you would do with kids. I mean, stimulating kids is always good, no matter what the activity. But there is something precise about music. Um, that's my personal conviction, of course. And my kids are both. I expose them to a lot of music, and I try to inject them with a virus, musical
It's a good
passion.
one.
Yes, and I do think it develops. I mean, it develops a lot of. If we think outside of the data, it develops a lot of expressivity, depth of emotional understanding. It starts with listening to music and how it makes you feel. I remember my daughter when she was very, very young. She had like books of songs and classical pieces, and she couldn't listen to certain ones, like Tchaikovsky, Swan Lake, for instance. She would stop me and say, "I can't listen to that. It makes me cry." And I think experiencing these this depth of emotion at such a young age can only be, helping them, have a better understanding of themselves, and being able to express it as well on an instrument is, I mean, that's all. I mean, what we have. Let's step out of kids. We have very, very clear data that learning an instrument, practicing an instrument throughout life is extremely good for the brain. That is without a doubt one of the best way to protect oneself against neurodegenerative diseases. It has very good effects on cognitive rehabilitation after stroke, on Parkinson disease, on Alzheimer disease, on preserving memory, attention capacities. There's a lot of data to support these sort of effects on the aging brain.
Okay.
So
Can
it
I
must be
can
good.
I add one question since I have the chance, and then we need to continue with the podcast. But it's like
Yeah.
it's
No,
a
it's
great
super
chance to
I
ask
interesting. I
her.
speak.
can't
Yeah,
I
stop
speak
whenever.
too much.
exactly.
I
It's
speak too
really
much. You guys can
interesting.
cut me off, at any point.
No, no, I it's the opposite. So basically, I was wondering. So the sound, for example, that comes from Africa is completely different from the sound that you are talking about, right? Which is much more European. I wonder, what's the drive? What's the root that causes these different sounds from different part of the world that are so dense, different and distinct, like distinctive, like you can clearly understand that when there is a boom cha, that's
Yeah.
Africa. So I'd like to understand if you have any insight in this. It would be amazing for me. It is really interesting.
I'm sure so many other people have so much more insights on that that it's hard for me to. What I can tell you
Mm-hmm.
is that African music at large is characterized by rhythmic complexity.
Mm-hmm.
My God, I'm sure so many people would want to kill me hearing that, but let's say very, just like very, very coarse strokes to delineate things. And so if you think, for instance, for into European music, European classical music has been marked by increasing harmonic complexity when the rhythmic structure has been fairly narrowed into simple rhythms. I mean, surely very simple for a long, long time. The most simple that could be done, really, if you think of Gregorian chant or Bach chorals or stuff like that. I mean, it's among the most simple things that you can do with rhythm. But then, I mean, so we have like people like, yeah, I don't know, Shostakovich or Stravinsky that pushed the rhythmic complexity, or Ligeti, or composers of at a later stage, late 19th, 20th century, that really pushed it with more complex, but nonetheless, it's so less complex than what you would find in Africa, in South America, which is basically the same, like it immigrated, it came from Africa,
Mm-hmm.
with slavery and the trafficking of humans to this continent, and also India, for instance. And I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
speak very precisely of other types of culture, but in India, I know that the rhythmic cycle is extremely, like, tremendously more complex than anything we have in Europe. Um, the reason why we have that, I would be worried to say stuff that are, I mean, you can think that it has to do with the purpose that it must serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rhythm is something that can be perceived by larger crowds. So if you use
Nice.
it
Right.
as a mean of social gathering, to serve some sort of social purpose, which we know music has evolved into. Like it does seems to have served social purposes across cultures, and that's how it was so ubiquitous and prevalent. But you can think that music in the 16th, 17th, 18th century in Europe was made for a very small crowd in a closed space where you can appreciate the colors, the complexity of the harmonies, because it doesn't get lost into the open air, because of the way music is being enjoyed and produced. And also the instruments support that. But if you're talking about society that live in open space and need to produce music that's heard from a larger crowd, because I mean, music is always about, or mostly about social gathering, and that's why it's so important for me to also play in front of audiences, because that's what music is about. But you can imagine smaller settings or more intimate settings, like Schubert would only play in his living room, literally, or else, giant crowds of like rave parties where people gather to get entranced into a similar rhythm, right? So yeah, so you would think rhythm has to do with larger crowds and open spaces, and harmonic complexity has to do with something that can be appreciated in more intimate settings or
Yeah,
closed.
that makes total sense. Thank you.
But I mean, yeah, I should. I mean, that's an intuition. I'm sure I
Yeah.
should. Yeah, I'm
It's
sure there are some much more complex things to
it's a
say about that.
brainstorming, still
Yeah,
good one. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on.
Yes.
Now number.
another number, one.
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna go with all the prime numbers.
Ooh, this is correct. What is the gender gap for you?
So today is November 6th, 2024. We just missed an opportunity to elect a woman president. And I want to say that I cannot imagine this happening without a deep, ingrained, reeking misogyny in the US. Because she did a
Not
good
only.
campaign. She was extremely smart. She is extremely smart. And she was questioned all along on her abilities to be a leader and to be a smart, independent individual, because she was a woman. And that's what the poll showed as well. Sorry, that was my little. So this question comes right on time. For me, the gender gap revolves mostly around maternity questions. I think I was lucky enough to evolve in an environment where my gender was never questioned against my abilities to be a good scientist. I was probably lucky also in this regard. And also, I never suffered, or well, let's say only marginally, as opposed to other people, did I suffer from, sexual misconduct. Let's put it this way. I've seen it happening. I've seen it happening even with myself, but it was very minor. And I didn't have a sense that it was impacting me in a bad way. Although I totally understand that it has to be addressed, because it can impact people in a very bad way in certain other situations. But still, I was lucky to be in an environment that was very supportive, I think, and all my supervisors across the years, I never had any idea that they were noticing that I was a woman, and sometimes even in a way that was not completely fully appropriate, but never it was a question of me being less proficient or anything like that. But when it comes to maternity, that's where the real problem arises. Because if you look at numbers in academia, PhD students, postdocs, up to assistant professor assistant, um, basically the more you progress, the less you have equality between genders, and you have a gender gap, because women, they have children and at a certain age, and this is when it impacts them dramatically. So I think there is more to think about how women can navigate the fact that they have children and how it impacts them, and think of ways, where of ways to have that reduced or at least talked about, because I don't think it's talked about that much. And
Right.
in other careers, it is more, like because we have also, I don't know. For men, having kids is always a bonus in life. It bumps them in their careers. It gives them better pays, better insurance deals, better loans. Everything is better if you're a man and you have kids, because it shows, you're a responsible man, and you're a patriarch, and so you're contributing to the most important role in society. And for a woman, I mean, it's it's valued, of course, but valued in the sense that, oh, now you have other priorities. Now you should be taking care of your children. And this is very present. And this is impacting the career of women for sure.
But since you had two kids, did impact you
Yes.
in your career?
Oh
Yes,
yeah, definitely. Yes, yes, yes.
you
Of
felt
course.
it. Okay.
No, but because I used to be a night owl, I was able to work. My brain was functioning at best between 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. And I did all my PhD like that before I had babies. But after, you're pregnant first for 9 months, and then you breastfeed them and you take care of them. And in my situation, at least, but I think, frankly, I was not an isolated case. And if anything, I was rather lucky, I think, in the way that those cores were. I mean, no, I was doing the heavy lifting, let's be honest, but I was still supported in that. Let's put it this way, to be fair. But so I'm not an isolated case, I'm the average case. And the average case is that you do all the heavy lifting as a woman, and it impacts your time to do research. That's just how it is. That has to be said and acknowledged.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely one thing that should be taken into place is also like the maternity leave as much as the paternity leave, and
Exactly.
this should help immediately, right? The fact that like they don't hire you because you are in the range of years. Yeah, and I felt it a lot, even though I don't think, I mean, I don't have problems at the moment because I don't have the idea of having a kid
No, but people have
now.
it for you. That's the
But
problem. That's the
exactly,
problem
yeah.
also, is that, with this gender gap, for instance, the problem is, even if you had the most equitable partner that is willing to show up at every stage, which is rare enough, but let's say, let's assume you have that. The problem is, for some reason, the pediatrician, when they need to call you to remind you of something or for lab results or whatever, they call the mother. The school does the same. Everybody relies on the mother much more. There is just a double standard that just exists, and it's carried by other people around you. And consciously or consciously or automatically, I don't know, but it's just the way it is. And so as a woman, you feel like the pressure to, okay, she's calling me, so I should be taking care of this, and I should be, so that's how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we should be talking a lot more on this, but let's go for the last question with the cards. Give me a number.
So I'll go for 13.
13. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There we go. Okay, we close like this. Your worst defect.
My worst defect.
Mm-hmm. A real one. I don't want to hear, I'm too precise, I'm too... A real one.
I'm much more excited about ideas and concepts and impulse and starting things and initiating new things than developing them until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Okay.
my problem, and
Okay.
it's a problem of a lot of researchers, I think, out there, is that we're people that get very excited about new concepts and new things, and sometimes we struggle. It's a learning thing. I think you can learn to be better at pushing things through, and it's also easier as you develop your career. Like to me, definitely, it's been easier as I've been more and more in the position in the seat of last author, because it's
Mm-hmm.
much more of a natural position for me to be at the impulse, and then finding someone that's gonna go with me along to finish and wrap up the work.
Mhm.
And some people are naturally very good at both, obviously, but for me it's yeah, it's my greatest default would be this one. In terms of my career, in terms of my personal life, I'm not gonna tell you.
Yeah, but I do have a question on this. Like, are you the kind of person that starts many books, or the kind of person that needs to finish one
I
first
know
and
I
then?
need to finish one book. No, because I do
Okay.
have no. I actually, if I don't finish a book, there are few books in my life that I have never finished, and I know until unless I die before, I know I will finish them, because it's like it's scratching my mind. It's always like I know exactly. I
Okay.
have like
Okay.
a list of book, and there are like very few, like on my hand of five, that I need to finish one day.
Okay. Okay.
It's yeah.
Then
Mhm.
go
It's
Fabri.
probably the Twilight series, and
No.
no,
One
no, I'm joking.
is I tried.
Because
I
I
gave
read
it
it.
another. Yeah, you read it. No, I gave another attempt this summer at finishing this book, and I still couldn't. But I will. I will finish it one day. It's Master and Marguerite by Bulgakov. That
I read it.
I started it when I was I mean no, some time ago, a few years ago, and I could never finish it. One day I will.
Okay, so we go for the very, very last question of the podcast. As we started with the question that Fabrizio and I want to ask you, the last one would be, who is the person behind the scientist in your case?
You mean me, or who
Mm-hmm,
am I
mm-hmm.
as a
Yeah.
um, well, the two are very blended together, because, as I
Mm-hmm.
said, those questions about music have always been there.
Yeah.
I very, very, very early in my life, my mom, we had a trip when I was very little. So I'm from France, and we would travel sometimes. And I went to Turkey as a very young child.
Mm-hmm.
I was five or so, and we went to a concert. And I was appalled by how the music was resonating with me, because it really felt completely different from everything that I knew, but still it was making sense to me, and so I was thinking, but how is it that this language that I don't understand anything about, my brain can't cope with, Turkish, but when it comes to the music that I've never heard before, I can make so much sense out of, without any prior exposure, without any prior. I formulated that much later, obviously, but at the time I was really shocked by the difference between the music and the language.
Mm-hmm.
And so the person behind the science is just someone who studied music from a young age, listened to a lot of music all her life, is genuinely passionate about the mysteries and the power of music. And I mean, that's what also fascinating and great about studying music and the brain, is that music is it's so mystical. It's a mystery, I mean, like the brain in some ways. But so you're dealing with a material that is endlessly ungraspable, and you try to model it, and in the process sometimes it hurts, because sometimes you hear like people putting music into such coarse, simplistic terms. But at the end of the day, people who know, they know it. Music is just something that
Mm-hmm.
creates emotion that are beyond words to explain, and what the emotion it can create as a crowd, two people playing music. I always say that um, non-musicians have that when they sing together, but us as musicians, like playing in a trio, playing in a string quartet, or even just sonata, it creates a bond with the other musician. You access to a level of their soul and their to yours that extremely intimate without being anything sexual or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there is something deeply sensual and intellectual about connecting around playing music together, that nobody can really, I mean, that the musicians know about, but it's kind of a little secret. And yeah, and so these are the stuff that have been with me all along, and that have really nourished my scientific inquiry.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you so much for participating in this episode. It has been incredibly interesting.
Mm.
Thank you. It was really such a pleasure for me to talk to you. You had so much, like you made me think of so much new things and stuff. It was really nice.
And for the listeners, we hope you will join us in the next one.